Ken Langone joins me now in a Fox Business exclusive. Well, what do you think of this?
If Intel couldn't raise the money through conventional sources, Intel is a critical need in America as a company and technology. If they couldn't raise it, I understand. However, this is not unlike 2008 when the banks were all in trouble. The government bailed them out. We've had previous episodes like that. I worry about us as a nation now becoming capitalist and the question of conflict of interest. Intel is a public company, should be subject to all government regulations and rules. Do they get an edge by virtue of the fact that the guy that's their regulator is also one of their owners? That's, okay? I admire what Trump is doing for one reason. He's saying, he's putting a stake in the ground. We have a critical need. Intel is very important in the technology going forward. We can't afford not to let them prosper or grow. But I think the public market should have been there first.
They were. SoftBank came in and made.
Oh no, he offered to put $2 billion in.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
Masayoshi Son, but also the government is the lender of last resort. Hopefully,
exactly.
Intel is not failing right now.
No, but they're also not talking about debt. He's talking about 10% equity. Mm-hmm. He's buying a piece of. When the government helped out with the TARP bonds, they got warrants to give them a ride on the recovery of the banks. And that was justified because they took the risk. They put a lot of money up. Mm-hmm. There was no place else for the banks to go. The number was enormous. They needed a lot of money. They did it. It worked out. The governments got redeemed. After 10 years, the bonds were retired. Then they had the warrants, and they made a lot of money on them. They should have. God bless, move on.
Does it smell a little bit like the government picking winners?
In this case, they're not picking a winner. I mean, you want a winner, Nvidia, or I mean, that's a winner. I mean, Intel's right now got its back to the wall, maybe. But again, if there was no other alternative, then I say God bless the government for doing it, because Intel is a national treasure that we need to help, particularly now when we're talking about the new technology and the growth of AI and all these other things that matter. But I'm a little uneasy. And of course, when Hassett came out this morning and said we're going to do more.
And the president just said it this afternoon.
I know.
But Kenny, you brought up Nvidia. Let's talk about Nvidia. Yeah. In exchange for licenses to sell their very proprietary chips to China, the president, who had earlier banned such sales and said it's too much of a national security, said, okay, you can sell this particular chip as long as you give us 15% of the sales of those chips to China. What does that look like to you?
Not good. Look, it's either right or it's wrong. Well, first of all, I'm led to believe that those chips that Nvidia is doing with China are not all that critical. They're more, I don't want to say off the shelf.
Slightly slower.
They're slower and something that
less powerful.
A lot of other people can do. Mm-hmm. Different thing.
Okay, but
I worry about people running to the government for help because they failed in a capitalistic way. They failed. They were just bad managers, or whatever reason they got in trouble. The government should not be there to bail out people.
It feels like, although to some people who look at this 15% stake in Nvidia and they say, geez, you know, the government calls it a 15% cut. Others are calling it a tax. Some call it a bald-faced shakedown.
Well, it would be a shakedown to me if it was going to go in somebody's pocket. It's going to go to the government. Look, I want to clear one thing up. Sure. I have real issues with this particular transaction. Overall, I love what this guy has been doing. And
President Trump.
What he's been doing, he did it in, it's 9 months now. I mean, you talk about warp speed. The guy is, now, the downside of that is he's taken on an awful lot of things at one time in a variety of different areas. But back to the chips, I have no trouble with them making a deal to get a piece of the action. I would call it a shakedown if it was going in somebody's pocket.
All right, let's talk about your bailiwick, your area of expertise. You have many, obviously, but Home Depot, he was the co-founder. We have a serious problem with housing affordability right now. The Federal Reserve said on Friday, Jay Powell said, you know, things have changed. We're seeing a bit of a slowdown in the labor market. We are considering maybe altering the path of what we've been doing with interest rates, intimating that he may cut interest rates in September. Does that make any kind of meaningful dent in the housing affordability gap?
No, I don't think initially it won't make that much of a difference. Over time it will. Interest is a very important factor because that's where your mortgage payments are based on, and that's what people buy homes saying, how much am I going to pay a month? I'm not in the school where interest rates have to go down. Okay? No, I think, for example, 4 years ago, they should have been raising rates earlier than they did. This is where Powell blew it. And I think he's trying to play catch up now. Now, I understand the significance. If we're heading into a recession, the Journal had an article this morning on the front page about hiring is sort of slowing up.
Slightly.
Slightly. I think that interest rates where they are right now are okay. Sure, I'd like them to go lower because we'll sell a lot more. They'll be doing more projects and everything like that. But we have to worry overall about inflation. What I'm uncomfortable about is the more I'm reading, people are saying, well, this much inflation is not that bad, and a little bit here and a little bit there. We want to be careful.
Then what is the answer to the housing affordability problem? A lot of people say we need more inventory.
Yeah.
You've got a guy running right now for mayor of New York City, Mamdani, and what's that race?
Oh, God.
You don't love that. He's very concerned. He won the Democratic primary because he went with housing inaffordability.
400,000 votes. That's what I mean, the primary in New York City is a joke. The school teachers load up and go to the polls and vote. And
what happens if he wins, though, and they do the same thing in November?
What happens if he wins? The exodus out of New York is going to accelerate. That's what's going to happen. I'm still a New York resident. I'm adamant. My wife and I feel very strongly. We made it here. We were born here. We were raised here. We've had good fortune here. We're going to do our share. And I think if everybody like me left the place, what about people like my parents who, when they were alive, couldn't afford to go someplace else? What about those people that are going to be stuck here because you got all these bills to pay and all these cash needs? So that's how I feel about that. But let me go back to Trump for a minute. This guy has done a hell of a lot of things that I'm really excited about. Number one, that Iranian thing, that was fabulous.
The bombing of the Iranian...
It was fabulous. The immigration issue, thank God. We don't know right now how many terrorist cells there are in America today, but there are some there.
Because of the open...
Because of the open gate. Easy. Saying, come on in, set yourself up.
And most Americans want a secure border.
Absolutely. And by the way, as long as we have an even-handed approach to immigration, there's nothing wrong with it. Now, there's going to be some lumps and some problems. For example, the farm workers in the Central Valley in California, I'm sure that's going to be a problem because a lot of them...
It already is, though.
Bingo. Okay.
So should there be a carve-out for hospitality workers and agricultural workers?
I think there ought to be reason.
Are you comfortable with watching raids at Home Depots in the...
Yeah, but they're not raids at Home Depot. Home Depot graciously, and God bless Home Depot, allows people who want to work. And the logic is simple. The contractors show up in the morning bright and early to buy the things they need for the job they're working on. And over there's a group of 15 to 20 men
who want to work.
Who want to work, and this guy needs one more guy for this job today, and he goes over and he takes the one guy. It's a shape-up. It's not unlike the old-fashioned shape-ups with the waterfront, with the dock work.
ICE agents know about that, and they are coming to your parking lots at Home Depot.
Well, look, we can't stop that, and we shouldn't try to stop it. Now, what I'm saying is that these there's a lot of people that are here illegally who really are good people who want to contribute to society. They just came in illegally, and they're terrified. I don't know how you address it, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's all I'm saying. And Home Depot, God bless Home Depot. I mean, we've got a wonderful policy on hiring people, on promoting people. I'm very proud of what we do and how we do it. But this is a situation where why do people go to the Home Depot and stand in the corner of the parking lot? Because that's where the contractors come at 7 o'clock in the morning in their pickup trucks to pick up what they need. Oh, by the way, I need 2 guys today. Who knows how masonry? Who knows sheetrock?
If you could speak to President Trump about that, what would you say?
I don't know how I could advise him to address the unevenness of it. It's a tough situation.
Very complicated.
Look, I want to tell you something. What this guy inherited on January 20th this year was a mess. A mess. Nobody wants, the other side didn't want it. It was a mess. We literally dropped the gate and said, come on in, 13 million, 14 million people. How many, we don't know. Look at what we did in Afghanistan. What an embarrassment the way we got out of Afghanistan. I can go right, look, overall, I'm thrilled with what Trump is doing. I'm a little concerned that he's doing too much too soon in different areas. You know, but I think on the other hand, he's saying, I've only got 4 years. Don't forget, he doesn't have 4 more years after that. He's only got 4 years, and he wants to get a lot done.
Kenny, I hope that you continue to do a lot of things all at once. At your stage, we're thrilled that you're here.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, and you know, I'm having a great time, and I enjoy life, and I've got a great bride of 68 years. We're going to celebrate our 68th anniversary in September. It's a great country, Liz.
You don't have to tell me that.
It's a wonderful country, and there's no other country like it. And let's just count our blessings for being Americans.
Let's leave it at that. A great, great bit of advice.